During a rare day off, the intercom at my house announced visitors. Standing there were Matt, looking in a foul mood, and Sarah, who appeared unwell. I was speechless, more by Sarah's appearance than their sudden visit. Her complexion was as pale as if drained of blood, and her skin was rough and tattered. What on earth had happened to her? What's the meaning of this? Hearing this, Matt snorted. He then put both hands in his pockets and answered with a disrespectful demeanor. It's simple. She says she's unwell and hardly does any housework. Ignoring my shocked expression, Matt continued to complain. I'm in a crucial phase of starting a business. Having someone who can't even control her own health or help out is just a nuisance. I felt my anger rising. It had been a while since I felt such intense anger. I confronted Matt, asking if he realized what he was saying. Then he insisted unapologetically that he was only saying the obvious things, and said, I don't know what you're misunderstanding, but there's no reason for you to yell at me. Useless, fat people are a nuisance. Take responsibility for her, you parents. I moved past my anger to a calm state of mind, managing to restrain my right hand, which I almost swung in frustration. I don't want someone like you around Sarah any longer. She will stay with us. Please leave immediately. I supported her body and slowly walked her to the living room. We sat down on the sofa side by side, and I made her favorite apple tea. By the time the tea in her hand had completely cooled, Sarah began to speak softly. My name is Gina. I'm a 49-year-old office worker. After a big romance with a university classmate, I married at 22, and a year later, we were blessed with a lovely daughter. My husband and I discussed back and forth and decided to name her Sarah. We were a happy family of 3 in a small apartment. But that happiness was fleeting. When I was 25, my husband suddenly fell ill and passed away, leaving Sarah, who was just 2 years old at the time. Since then, I have tirelessly balanced work and parenting. Everything was for raising my lovely only daughter well and healthy. There were countless hardships and sorrows. However, seeing Sarah's smile gave me strange strength. Sarah, I desperately raised, is already 26. Although a bit introverted and timid, she grew up to be a kind and bright young woman. She currently works in caregiving. Despite some difficulties, she finds her days fulfilling. Sarah keeps in touch frequently since moving out for college, sharing her daily experiences and work vividly. Yet in her personal life, she seemed to struggle with romance, which secretly worried me. Then one day, Sarah introduced me to a man named Matt, a 28-year-old, 2 years her senior, working as a salesperson for a caregiving products company. They met through work because her company was a client of his company. They were steadily dating, and to my surprise, they were planning to marry. I was so delighted that I jumped up from my chair without thinking. Having grown up without a father, Sarah was uncomfortable around men. But she brought home such a friendly, nice young man. I got carried away, pulling out Sarah's childhood albums and spreading them on the table. His expression, as she tried to stop me, blushing, seemed full of love. I wholeheartedly blessed their marriage. And their harmonious atmosphere made me confident in their happy future from then on. After their wedding, Sarah and Matt enjoyed a harmonious newlywed life, including a honeymoon in Greece, respecting Sarah's wishes. I had never been able to take her abroad because I barely get by every day. The photos of them happily posing on a Greek beach showed Sarah's utmost joy. Sometime after their return, they sent an invitation to their wedding ceremony. Their names written together, Sarah and Matt, seemed to sparkle. And I hugged the invitation tightly to my chest. They shared such wonderful happiness at the wedding, and 6 months later, Sarah was actually pregnant. Surprisingly, it was Matt who called to inform me of her pregnancy. joyfully telling me that he had just learned about it from Sarah. It was a day when a little shadow was added to the bright future I had envisioned for them. Sarah's baby was growing well, and she was soon approaching her due date. However, as her pregnancy progressed, so did the demands of my job, and I found it difficult to visit her. When I apologized over the phone, she would laugh brightly and assure me it was okay. But I knew that even daily life can be challenging for a pregnant woman. I spent my days consumed with worry and frustration. As these days continued, I finally found a moment to breathe. During one of my rare days off, I thought of visiting Sarah when the intercom signaled visitors. Wondering if a package was due, I opened the front door and gasped in surprise. There stood Matt, in a bad mood, and Sarah, looking terribly unwell. I lost words again at the sight of the two, especially Sarah's pallid, rough complexion and unkempt hair. What on earth had happened to Sarah? I quickly supported her into the house, sitting her on the sunlit chair in the kitchen to warm her chilled body. Matt, who should have been concerned, didn't move to help. Facing Matt, I couldn't help but ask sternly, "What's the meaning of this?" Hearing this, Matt snorted. He then put both hands in his pockets and answered with a disrespectful demeanor. "It's simple. She says she's unwell and hardly does any housework." I couldn't quite understand what Matt was saying. Ignoring my shocked expression, Matt continued to complain. "I'm in a crucial phase of starting a business. Having someone who can't even control her own health or help out is just a nuisance." I felt my anger rising. It had been a while since I felt such intense anger. I confronted Matt, asking if he realized what he was saying. Then he insisted unapologetically that he was only saying the obvious things, and said, "I don't know what you're misunderstanding. But there's no reason for you to yell at me. Useless. Fat people are a nuisance. Take responsibility for her, you parents." I moved past my anger to a calm state of mind, managing to restrain my right hand, which I almost swung in frustration. I embraced Sarah protectively and said to Matt forcefully, "I don't want someone like you around Sarah any longer. She will stay with us. Please leave immediately." Matt raised his eyebrows sharply and, after hurling some insults, turned his back on us and stomped away. I quickly closed the door behind him, eager to be rid of his presence at once, and rushed to Sarah. As I gently stroked Sarah's back, I suggested we move to the living room. She slowly stood up, and I supported her as we walked together to the living room. We sat down on the sofa side by side, and I made her favorite apple tea. By the time the tea in her hand had completely cooled, Sarah began to speak in bits and pieces. From the beginning of their marriage until early in her pregnancy, Matt had been a very kind and good young man. He had gone out of his way to meet almost all of Sarah's requests for the wedding plans, and patiently listened to Sarah, who wasn't very good at speaking. It seemed that she had found true happiness with him. However, as he spent more time in the competitive world of sales, his ambition for advancement grew, and his personality became increasingly self-serving. This change in character began to show not only at work but also at home. It became a daily occurrence for him to berate Sarah, calling her lazy while she was bedridden with pregnancy sickness. If dinner was slightly late or the bath wasn't ready, he would hurl terrible insults at her. Once Sarah went on maternity leave, Matt insisted that it was only natural for her, who was slacking off at home, to handle all the housework perfectly, even pushing onto her the chores they had initially agreed to share. Dragging her unwilling body, Sarah would wake up at 4 a.m. to prepare his lunch and breakfast, ensuring the house was spotlessly cleaned from corner to corner to avoid any complaints. She would help him get ready in the morning and, while eating breakfast, jot down each complaint he had about the food. If she didn't, he would yell at her for not listening properly. By afternoon, She would finish the rest of the household chores and paperwork he had ordered her to do, and then start preparing dinner. If they sat down together for a meal, she'd be scolded for lazily eating. So she took her meals either before he came home or after he had gone to bed. Eventually, Sarah could no longer taste anything she ate. But thinking of her unborn child, she never skipped a meal. After hearing everything, tears involuntarily welled up in my eyes. I hurriedly covered my eyes with my hand. But Sarah must have realized I was crying because she started rubbing my back. Despite all she had been through, she spoke dispassionately, without shedding a tear. A fierce anger at myself for not noticing sooner welled up inside me. I embraced Sarah tightly, as if shaking off the tears. "I'm sorry I didn't notice, Sarah. It's not your fault. It's mine for not saying anything. No, Sarah, it's not your fault. You did well. It must have been hard. From now on, let's live leisurely, just like we used to." As I said this, Sarah's body began to tremble. I hugged her even tighter, and she began to cry out loud. I gently patted Sarah's back as we both shed tears, and after we had cried ourselves out, we had a peaceful, family-only dinner for the first time in a while. We then laid out blankets in the living room and fell into a calm sleep together. Eventually, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My first grandchild was adorable and very dear to me. Leaving Sarah and the baby in the care of the nurses, I stepped outside the hospital with my cell phone in hand. It was to contact Matt, the father of the child and still legally Sarah's husband. I pressed the call button with a grimace. The first call did not connect. The second attempt also failed. I sighed deeply, fed up. I quickly pocketed my cell phone and turned back to the hospital room. For my daughter and adorable grandson. I thought that I would never contact him again, but 3 days later, Matt suddenly appeared in the hospital room. However, more than being angry at his audacity and insensitivity, I was taken aback. Next to him stood a garishly dressed woman, leaning on him as if they were intimate. Sarah seemed to meet her for the first time too, turning pale as she stared at the two of them. I asked him before Sarah did. "Who is this person?" "This is Kristen. She's a colleague of mine and I'm planning to bring her with me when I start my business. Unlike Sarah, she's a competent woman." Although his words were infuriating, it was the closeness of their relationship that really bothered me. That must have shown on my face because Matt snorted, raised his chin proudly, and started bragging. "Sarah, let me introduce her to you. This is my girlfriend. We've been dating for 6 months. She's not fat or slow, but a good woman, right?" Sarah looked down, trembling as she heard those words. Her complexion grew even paler as she clutched her son to her chest. Watching this, Matt marched up to her bed and forcibly peered at the baby's face. Then, as if he had seen something disgusting, he twisted his face and stuck out his tongue, saying, "Ugh, the baby is ugly too. Takes after its mother. If it had been Kristen's kid, it would have been cute. Though, Matt, if you say that, maybe I should try harder, huh?" The two of them seemingly embraced each other and burst into laughter. Sarah was trembling, with the same vacant look in her eyes as the day she came to our house with him. Seeing Sarah's state, Kristen snorted and pulled something from her bag. She held it up in front of Sarah and fluttered it while saying, "So, you're Sarah, right? Here, take this child support and divorce him, will you? Oh, don't worry about the money, it's just pocket change to us." And they burst into laughter again. I was too stunned to say anything. Then a woman sharing the room and a nurse present for an exam outraged on my behalf and voiced their anger. Yet, even as they pointed out the outrageousness of the behavior, Matt and Kristen showed no remorse. Matt then pressed Sarah in a domineering tone. Hey, you're going to divorce, right? Sarah nodded silently, a small gesture. Unable to rebuke them, I just glared at the two. They left the hospital room laughing loudly, pleased with themselves. Following that, the physical exhaustion from childbirth combined with the stress of the incident caused Sarah to stay in the hospital much longer than initially planned. I took a leave from work to care for my grandchild and support my daughter. Each time I saw her weakly apologizing and expressing her gratitude, my anger towards Matt surged anew. 3 months passed, and Sarah's hospitalization continued, recently resulting in her moving to a different ward. Her new roommate, Aileen, was a pleasant person, and we quickly became friendly. Today, we were enjoying a lively chat, when suddenly the door to the hospital room burst open without a knock. Surprised by the thoughtless visitor, I turned to the door. Standing there was Matt, for the first time since that day. Hey, I've come to visit. Matt said this and approached Sarah's bed with an arrogant attitude. I quickly moved to shield her. Although Matt was supposed to be banned from visiting, it seemed the message hadn't been relayed due to the recent ward change. I glared at him, on guard. Ignoring our reactions, he started bragging about his nearly launched company. Clearly just to boast. Despite our disdain, his speech rolled on. So, I'll accept that baby as my heir. Hand over the child's custody to me. Stunned into silence by his audacity, Aileen, filled with anger, spoke up. Excuse me, do you understand what you're saying? Shut up. Mind your own business. I couldn't stand it and got into an argument with Matt, who kept bragging about Kristen, hurling insults, and demanding his son. Our voices were growing louder when a knock at the door interrupted us. It was Eileen's husband. Our voices had carried outside, and he came to see what was happening. I began to apologize and explain the situation to Aileen and her husband. But Matt's loud voice overlapped mine. Wait, the president. So, this woman is? Hearing his flipped, foolish tone, Sarah burst out laughing. I too felt a surge of relief at his foolishness and said with a dismissive tone. You finally realized? Sarah looked straight into his eyes and snorted derisively. It turned out that Eileen's husband was a major client of Matt's. One that he had been extremely careful not to offend. Aileen and Sarah had become close enough during their hospital stay to share everything, including this series of events involving Matt. Similarly, Eileen's family-oriented husband, frequently visiting, was already aware of the situation and visibly angry about it as if it were his own. Matt turned pale and repeatedly apologized to Eileen's husband. However, Eileen's husband was firm, telling him he was apologizing to the wrong person. In a panic, Matt turned to apologize to Sarah, but his apology was clearly insincere, spreading a wave of disgust through the room. Matt tried desperately to excuse himself, but Eileen's husband remained stern. Finally, he was told to leave the room immediately. Realizing it was unwise to argue further, he left the room dejectedly. Afterward, this story spread quickly through Eileen's husband's business network. And naturally, Matt's reputation plummeted. Furthermore, Sarah had been maintaining frequent communication with Matt's clients by sending birthday cards and more. So when they heard of his terrible treatment of her, one by one, they ceased their dealings with him. Many of Matt's clients, who had seen Sarah as a good confidant and advisor, spurred by the angry wives and mothers among them, decided to cut ties. While Matt was competent at his job, his plans for entrepreneurship crumbled under these circumstances. He had to continue working at his original company, where he was sidelined due to his previous attempt to underhandedly steal company clients. And he became shunned internally as the word of his mistreatment of Sarah spread. Kristen, unable to fulfill the role that Sarah had, frequently argued with Matt, who had taken Sarah's dedication for granted. Her envisioned future of elite life with Matt fell apart. And unable to endure the surrounding scorn, Kristen resigned. Financial difficulties and constant arguments soon led them to separate. Later, Kristen came back to Sarah, demanding the return of the child support she had flaunted in the hospital. But my daughter firmly turned her away. Having regained her innate brightness and newfound strength as a mother, Sarah was not perturbed by Kristen's childish abusive remarks. Sarah, bright and strong once more, found a good match through Eileen's connections. Her partner cherishes Sarah and her child, and they are now living a happy life together. As for Matt, his downfall continued. According to Aileen, financially and functionally struggling Matt, who took out his stress on female employees at work, eventually lost his position and was fired. His pride making it impossible to hold down even day-to-day jobs. His descent into further hardship was easy to imagine. About a year after Sarah's remarriage, Matt, in a last-ditch effort, contacted her, suggesting they get back together since no one else would want a divorced woman with a child. However, Sarah was already remarried and living happily, leaving no place for Matt in her life. Hearing this, he was reportedly devastated. Now, what kind of souvenir should I bring today? Filled with excitement, I'm off to visit my daughter's joyful family. Thinking of the perfect gift to take along.